Hello everyone, Lance here, and this is the first tutorial about the World Blender Landscape Generator. And since this is the first tutorial, I'm going to show you something simple. And by something simple, I mean this landscape with a lake and some mountains, some trees, and some clouds, and that's it. Alright, let's get started. First, we need to delete the cube as well as the default light and create a plane. Now you can totally procedurally generate your entire landscape, but for this tutorial I want to show you a feature of the World Blender Landscape Generator, and that is the ability to turn your landscape sculpting into a landscape object and run some erosion. Let's tap to edit mode and move it to the right by 1 meter and move it to the forward by 1 meter. And hit N to open this panel and make it 500 meters. Now there is one thing you should know is that Blender used 32 bits to store float values, so the precision is not very good. So if you try to sculpt a very large landscape, for example something like 4000 by 4000, then all of your brush may run into issues. So I suggest sculpting a small landscape before scaling the landscape up. So I'm going to just sculpt a 500 by 500 plane into a landscape. But first let's just apply all the transform. There we go. And tap to edit mode and subdivide it a couple of times like that. And finally I'm going to add a multi-resolution modifier and using the simple method to subdivide a little bit. And let's see the mesh density maybe one more time. Nah, this is good enough for me. So let's go to sculpt mode, and I'm going to lock the X and Y dimension because I only want to sculpt the vertices up and down. Now I'm just gonna use the grab brush to move things up and down a bit to shape the mountains like that. And I want a lake at the center, so I'm gonna just move the ground down like that. Alright, this is the landscape sculpting, and although there are still rooms for improvement, but I think this is already good enough to move on. In any case, we can always come back later and change the landscape however we like. So for the next step, we're gonna start using the geometry nodes. Create a new geometry node and name it generator. We can now split the view and go to geometry node editor. Now the World Blender is not actually an add-on, it's just a collection of node groups that I created. So just link the node groups in, and this is the landscape nodes, and just link all the node trees. Just select everything and link. Now we can convert this landscape sculpting into a landscape. So we are going to search for object to landscape. There we go. And be sure to allow negative projection. Okay, so this is the landscape object. We can't use the geometry right away because we need to generate some information to store within the landscape for the other nodes to run. So let's just convert this to a landscape real quick. Now there is some problems with the edge here. This is gonna totally mess up the convexity later on. So yeah, we need to set the negative margin like -1. There we go. To get rid of the edge like that. Alright, so this is a usable landscape now, and it's currently storing the height information in the default height channel, that is height. But if you want to use, let's say, a different height channel like H1 or something like that, then the height channel will be named H1. And for the later nodes, you need to specify the height channel you want to use as well. Otherwise, it's gonna use the default height channel called height. Alright, let's just leave the high channel as a blank so that we use the default high channel. So now this is a landscape, but the thing is that it's just 499 by 499, which is pretty small. I want a 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. So I'm gonna just scale this whole landscape up by 4 times. So create a transform node and scale all the dimensions by 4 times. Alright, now this is a 2 by 2 kilometers. And as you can see, we are starting to have some problems with the viewport. So let's go here and increase the end clip to 10,000. And the clip start to be like 1. And also, we might want to increase the resolution of this object to landscape. So let's say 512. And that's a little too much resolution because you can start to see some imperfection here. But whatever, we're gonna just leave it as that, and we're gonna resample this to something much higher resolution. Now you can't just set the high resolution like 2048 here, because it's gonna reveal all the little sharp edges of the base sculpting. So we're gonna just set this to 512. So I'm gonna search for a resample landscape node, and I'm gonna resample this to 2048, but it's going to make the viewport kind of slow. You see, Blender's freezing right now. Let's wait for a moment. There we go. And let's turn on the timing so that we know which node costs the most time. So as you can see, we wasted like almost like 9 seconds to convert this to a 2048. So it's a good idea to just lower this resolution in the viewport for now. So let me just lower this to something like 0.125. It's going to be a 256 by 256 landscape. So let's just connect these to the group input so that we can tweak these later on. Now we're gonna add some more details to our landscape. So I'm gonna create a noise displacement. There we go. And let me just tweak the numbers a bit. Let's say this to 10 meters and this to be 10 meters as well, to add some details like this. Now there is this mix mode parameter here. Set this to 1 so that you kind of add the value of the noise to the landscape. If you set this to 2, it's going to subtract the noise value from the landscape, and 3 for maximum, 4 for minimum, 5 for multiply, and 6 for divide. So let's just set this back to 1 because we need to add the noise on top of the the landscape. And we're not going to set the details to 5. Alright, let's just leave everything else. Now this noise is a little too uniform, so I'm going to just warp the landscape a bit to distort the noise. So search for the warp landscape. There we go. And I'm gonna warp, the warp scale should be 5 and the roughness 0.5. Yeah, let's just leave everything else as default. That's good enough, but as you can see, we don't have enough resolution to see what's going on, so let's just increase this to 0.5 to see what's going on. And it looks kind of alright. So we need some more variations for our landscape. So here I'm gonna add a ridge displacement, and again, every time we do something, the whole node network kind of rerun, so I don't want to wait for all that. I'm just gonna lower this down to 1.25 so that we have a 256 by 256 landscape. This is gonna be a lot faster. And just drop the ridge in, and for the ridge size, let's set this to 50, and detail step size to 3, and the detail level to 3, and this maybe 10. Okay, as you can see, the ridge kind of break up the landscape a bit more, but I think we need some more variations for our landscape. So yeah, we need to add some more displacement. So let's just search for another noise. This time we're gonna use a slightly larger noise, maybe something like 150, and the intensity of the noise should be around 50 maybe? Nah, 100, and offset this down by 50 meters. Alright, and we can also change the randomness of the noise. And as you can see, our landscape is looking a lot better now. And again, we can always go back to the sculpt mode and sculpt the landscape to change the final result. But I'm not going to do that because it's going to take some time. Now I think the details are enough. To be sure, let's increase this back to 1 and see the full resolution and see how it looks. And let's just wait for the result. There we go. Now there is one rule of thumb that I always try to check, is that every single vertex must have some details in it, right? If you have like a lot of vertices that are kind of form a smooth surface, then that's no good. You have to have a rough surface at the individual vertex level like this. All right. Now you can see we have quite a lot of details here, but we don't have to worry about that because the water is going to smooth out everything when we run the erosion. So let's just set this back down to 0.125. There we go. And it's about time we drop the erosion node. Now I actually made some improvements to this erosion node after the last video. For starter, we have this rest iterations. This rest iterations basically add some more simulation at the end of the erosion for the dirt and the water to just fall down without eroding anything. So by default it's set to 0, so we have faster simulation, but we don't have the rest simulation. All right, and we also have this debris loss value, which indicate the amount of debris being carried away from this landscape. Basically, it's the loss of debris over time. And another change I made to this erosion is that the erosive power is a lot stronger and a lot more accurate. Before, if you try to increase the resolution, you will see a slightly more erosion. But now I fixed the erosive power so that no matter the resolution, the landscape will look somewhat the same. And also the erosive power is a lot stronger, and you can erode the entire landscape into dirt with the correct number. Now I don't know if you actually need to erode the landscape that much, but yeah, you have the power to do that. Alright, let's just tweak the values before activating the erosion node. First, let's set this water spread to 0. I don't want any water spreading. And for evaporation rate, let's set this to 0.004. Debris carrying capacity, let's set this to 3, and 0.1 for debris loss. Debris protect rock, maybe 0.1. Erosive power. Now the erosive power is very strong, so this number is going to erode the entire landscape into dirt. So we need to lower the erosive power to 0.6 and increase the rock hardness to 0.8. As for the rock filter, let's set it to something bigger so that the the water cutting into the rock kind of expand over time. And debris scaling, everything else, let's just leave as is. Now maybe let's just get rid of the thermal erosion and increase the rest iteration to 4 so that the dirt and the water kind of fall down a little bit more after the simulation. Alright, let's activate and see what it looks like. And again, we have to wait for the geometry node to work, and it's done. It took 6 seconds for this 256 by 256 landscape. Let me just use Cycles render engine GPU, and let me just tweak these a little. This will be 512. Get rid of this. Turn on the noise. Optics. Alright. And for the render, let's just use 512 and leave everything else. For the light path, increase the volume to 1, diffuse to 1, gloss, yeah, leave everything else default. Let's render and go to material, shader editor, and go to the world and create a sky texture. There we go. And let's change the sky a little. This is a little too strong, so set this down to 0.2 and increase the sun elevation up a little. Yeah, we're gonna play around with this later. Let's increase the size of the sun. Now let's increase the air to make the horizon a little warmer, and increase the ozone to have the sky a little more blue. Because by default, setting ozone to 1, we don't see a lot of blue on the sky. So increase the ozone a little, like that. And maybe lower the amount of air and get rid of the dust. Maybe get back a little bit of dust. Now we need to work on some materials for the landscape in order to figure out what's going on, because right now everything looks the same, but as you can see, we have a little bit of erosion. But we might need to tweak the numbers a little more to get a correct result. A desirable result. Now there's a inconvenience about Blender is that if I click this to create a new material, then the entire modifier stack kind of rerun again for nothing. And we will end up wasting quite a lot of time to wait for the modifiers to rerun. So I'm going to just rename this to generator. And I'm going to create another object. But first, let's set the cursor to the root, to the same origin of this landscape, wherever it is. So I'm going to create another plane, and I'm going to call this the render mesh. This generator should not be rendered, so let me just turn this off. All right. And we're not gonna create a geometry node. And let's go back to geometry node editor and get rid of this. All right, and drop in the generator. All right, now we need to wait for the generator to rerun all the generations. And now we can do other stuff here without rerunning the entire landscape generator. So here I'm gonna create a material, and I'm going to call it land. All right, and here I'm gonna convert this landscape to object. So there we go. And this is going to use the land material. Now this node will remove a lot of data from the landscape, so this geometry coming out here will not be usable for any other World Blender node. So this should be the final node of the landscape generation. Any other node behind this node is going to be a separate part. All right, it's not part of the landscape generation. It's something else. For example, something like scattering trees and stuff. All right, let me just go to shader editor and create a landscape data node. Now we have this debris data, which indicate the dirt map. All right, and we can use this to mix between the rock and the dirt. So I'm going to create a shader, a mix shader, and this is going to be our dirt, and another principle for the rock. There we go. And for the rock, let's set the color to something dark and get rid of, reduce the specular and increase the roughness. The same for the dirt. But for the dirt, let's set this to some green color. All right. So this is our landscape, and as you can see, it looks pretty good already. But we need some more erosion because right now we still have too much rocks. So let me just go back to this generator and go back to geometry editor And let's increase the erosive power or reduce the rock hardness maybe to 0.6. And let's wait for the thing to rerun. There we go. It seems better. I think I need a little more debris carrying capacity because right now the water does not carry a lot of debris. And let's wait. Alright, everything seems to be pretty good.